Welcome back, my friends, to AA Recovery Interviews. I'm your host, Howard L., and I'm an alcoholic. Sober since January 1st, 1988, one day at a time. I'm grateful you've joined us. AA Recovery Interviews is the podcast where Alcoholics Anonymous members from around the world share their extraordinary stories of experience, strength, and hope. I invite you to scroll through my catalog of awesome interviews on any podcast app or at the website aarecoveryinterviews.com. Every episode is unique, inspiring, engaging, and meaningful. Each story is a powerful testimony of the recovery available to all in AA. So sit back and enjoy this encore episode of my interview with Alisha C. from July 2021.
My name's Alisha, and I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Alisha.
Hi.
Hi. I feel like I just said hi to you, but that was a couple of days ago when we were sitting in the meeting together. You were on Zoom. I was in the live meeting. That's a meeting that you and I went to for a lot of years together until you recently moved.
Absolutely. And, before the pandemic also.
Yeah.
So the pandemic really kind of forced a lot of changes to occur with how we interact in AA, which I think was really quite fabulous. It's not something that probably would have happened had we not had a pandemic. And I think that it has really allowed the program to expand.
I think you're right. And the cool thing about the meeting that we did a couple of days ago is about 2/3 of the people were live in the room there at the church. And then another 20 or so people were on Zoom. And because of the technology that they have there with the LCD projector and the pull-down screen, and we had an external mic, it came about as close to a real live meeting as possible, having the Zoom folks up there. So I'm really pleased. And when I was looking up there, I realized that there were at least 5 people who, if they did not have Zoom, they would not be able to come to that meeting because they're all out of town.
Yeah. It's allowed us to broaden the scope of who we can reach.
It really does.
And we're so interconnected in so many different ways. And this just allows us to really branch out even further and make this program more available, which I think is fantastic. I mean, there's so many people who have left that have been able to come back and attend meetings where they originally started getting sober or to expand out to new areas.
Yeah. Have you been to any live meetings since all this happened?
Yeah, I've been to a couple in Houston, and I've also been to a couple here in Santa Fe.
Wow. Okay. And what were those like when you went in?
Oh, in which place?
Well, either place. Were they still wearing masks when you came to Houston, or were the masks not required any longer?
So I've done both.
Yeah.
So I've been to some in Houston where the masks were still required, several months ago.
Right.
And I've also been back since masks are no longer mandatory.
Yeah.
And same here. When I went to a meeting here in Santa Fe initially, it was, masks were required. And this last one I went to last week, actually, they were not required.
Yeah. And that's how it is on the meeting that you and I were just in on Tuesday. That's been a great meeting for a long time, and I know you've been a member there for a long time. You were doing some really great service work for the group there, being the treasurer and everything. What do you think there is about that meeting that makes it so special?
There's something about the connectedness between the members that attend that group that has touched me since I very first started attending that meeting. There's meetings everywhere, but for some reason, there's something amongst the members that attend that group that there is a lot of caring, concern, and actual friendship that has evolved and developed from being a part of that group. And it's very visible. It's noticeable. I mean, you feel it when you walk in the room that everyone there cares about the sobriety and that person as a whole.
Yeah, and of course that comes through loud and clear over Zoom, because when we were running that meeting before the live meetings recommenced a couple months ago, that same level of sharing and feeling, I think, was very present in the Zoom meetings. So that's pretty important. How long have you been going to that meeting, would you say?
I would say probably 6 years, maybe 7, not that long. It was, during a transition in life, whenever I was able to start attending more noon meetings, and I checked that one out.
Right.
And, before I started graduate school was when I was approached about doing the treasurer position. And I'm a firm believer that whenever I know that my personal life may get a little chaotic and busy, the best thing that I can do is take on some sort of service group with the group that will keep me connected to a meeting. So, doing that treasurer job for 3 years really helped keep me connected.
That's important.
Well, I definitely know that in the last year, moving, some other personal life changes, a bunch of, chaos that kind of occurred, which happens because we're alcoholics.
Yeah.
Being connected to groups and to members via service work definitely was the catalyst that kept me sober throughout some of the most trying times that I've experienced in my sobriety.
Oh, yeah.
And I know that, whenever I have a commitment to someone else or to another group, that I'm not constantly thinking about myself and my woes.
Yeah.
And generally it allows me to keep that mindset that I need to keep, that my primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics achieve sobriety.
Right.
Period.
Right. And it's also a way I've noticed when I've recommended to guys I sponsor to get involved in service work, like either chairing a meeting for the month or being a treasurer or something, it creates an inherent commitment to be there every week, or at least be accountable to the group in a way that you sometimes aren't when you're just another member coming into the room that day. So how long have you been sober?
So in April, it was 12 years.
Was that the first time that you had gotten sober 12 years ago, or had you had other runs at sobriety?
Well, so I would say it wasn't my first attempt. It's been the first time that I've actually been able to put together sobriety. I spent several years going to treatment, going to detox, getting in some, doing lots of IOPs, trying out sobriety. But it wasn't until, April 10th of 2009 that I have actually put together what I would call sobriety and recovery. I mean, maybe a couple of months here and there, but before then, but now is when it has actually been something that I have not only done, worked towards, and maintained.
Yeah. And it's apparent that you have, if you've got 12 years and you're expressing your feelings for AA the way you are, that's pretty evident. What was different about this time that you came in 12 years ago than when you had come in previously? What was missing from those attempts?
When I reflect back to that day that I got sober, which, obviously no one is planning the day to get sober.
Yeah.
I was experiencing a pretty significant legal consequence as a result of my using. And I remember feeling somewhat relieved that it might be over. And in addition to that, I spent some time really kind of in reflection, kind of forced sobriety reflection, where I realized that I no longer could blame anybody else for the troubles that I was experiencing. Previously, I'd always had my mom trying to save me, or, trying to, lessen the blow, or whatever the case may be, and getting away with things that probably I shouldn't. And at this moment, I realized that everyone that I had been blaming for all of my problems for so long, not only were they not involved in what was happening in that moment, but they had kind of cut me out of their lives. And it was really a sobering moment to realize that the only person I had to blame was myself, and that if I wanted something different, I was going to have to do something different. And even in that moment, I remember thinking to myself that I didn't know if this was going to last forever, but I was going to have to try something, and I'd give it a year and see how I felt.
Yeah. So in your mind, they had given up on you.
Oh, yeah.
And you needed to do something. Yeah, I get that. So before you were still playing the game, you were still allowing the kind of behavior to occur that you could get away with. You mentioned your mom pulling you out of the mire along the way. Is that something that goes back to your childhood? And what was your early life like at home?
Ooh, early life was a little challenging, extremely, I would say, chaotic and inconsistent. I had a father that had mental illness and was, not willing to address it. My parents were divorced. My mom had 2 children whom she had relatively young. She didn't really have parents that were super helpful. So it was really just kind of us as a family unit. And we were figuring it out as we went along. And there was a lot of instability, I would say.
Yeah.
And so I think that perhaps, wanting to help me soften blows had a lot to do with the fact that I'd already experienced so much in my younger years.
Yeah.
That what she really didn't want to see happen was me fall apart as an adult. Not only that, I mean, I had a kid of my own at this point.
Yeah.
So wanting me to show up as a parent and be available to my own daughter so that we can break that cycle of, instability and chaos that occurs that really kind of keeps this kind of stuff going.
Yeah. I came from an upbringing that's just as chaotic, and neither of my parents drank either, but there was mental illness, certainly, with my dad. And I found that I carried a lot of the emotional baggage from childhood into adolescence. That was one of the reasons why I acted out, whether it was with alcohol or in other ways, when I was a teenager. What was it like for you?
Well, I feel like everything was pretty chaotic, and I was just trying to, reduce that internal kind of conflict of this is what the world looks like, and this is how I view what the world is, what's happening in the world. So, I think that, having all of this turmoil in my younger years and going into adolescence and even into my adult life, I can say that these are probably compounding in why I chose to pick up drugs and alcohol, which I started relatively young.
You did.
But I really don't think that there's much of an excuse except for I tried it, I liked it, I felt like I finally could relax, and that not necessarily that I fit in, but that, the world kind of made more sense, and I wasn't trying to dodge anything. And not only that, my father had been my real father. He's deceased. I have a stepfather who has basically raised me, who was fantastic, but my real father, who had the mental illness, was also he had been struggling with drugs and alcohol my whole life.
Yeah, that's tough. So about the time that you took your first drink or used your first drug, how were you feeling?
So lots of confusion. I had a lot of additional things that have happened, being a girl, having, broken home, having some other things. I experienced some stuff that was probably more significant than perhaps, my older brother. However, I'd had, some sort of a superficial suicide attempt. I'd had all of these significant things that probably, looking back on now, make a heck of a lot more sense why I turned to, this sounds like a really good idea. At the time, it just seemed almost fluid. It made sense that that's why I did it, because it was the next thing that showed up in front of me. And I was just willing to try anything to kind of escape maybe the mindset that I had of that life was just torture.
Yeah, I get that, because it was kind of that way for me too. I didn't plan, or I wasn't thinking, I'm going to take a drink or use a drug because that's the way I think I can escape the way I'm feeling. It was just the next thing that happened, and just coincidentally, it made me feel different and better, and whatever it did for me. How old were you when you first took your first drink?
My first drink was probably pretty young, but do you mean on my own?
Oh, yeah, on your own, by your own volition, let's say, because everybody has an experience where somebody gave them a little alcohol when they shouldn't have, when they were small. But when it was your decision to pick up the drink or the drug, how old were you?
I was in the 7th grade.
Okay.
So I guess that's 12 or 13 maybe, which ironically is when I had that suicide attempt too.
Oh my.
So, something was happening. Something was definitely going on. And I think, as an adult that has, evolved somewhat in life, I look back, I'm like, wow, something was definitely happening at that point. But you can't really blame anyone. I had always been this kid that kind of didn't really have a lot of social friends. I really kind of spent a lot of time with myself. I had a few close friends, and that was really it. Everything else was pretty superficial. So no one would have really known what was happening, because it was all internal.
Was there a point during that internal struggle that you were having that you reached out for help, or if somebody tried reaching in to you? So
I did end up spending some time in a treatment center for depression. That was back before insurance ran out. So it was several months, and, my mom got me into therapy, and I had this great therapist. So it's not like I didn't have someone trying to reach in. But I think that I had been so reserved and so guarded for so long that I didn't know how to let anyone in, or how to articulate really what it was that I was feeling, because it had become so normal for me, even though it was uncomfortable. That was normal. That was my baseline.
That was your baseline at 12 or 13 years of age. When you took that first drink or started using, could you notice an immediate effect from it? And was it one that you wanted to continue to chase, or what was your experience?
Gosh, it's so funny because I don't ever think about that stuff very much, but I would say obviously had some sort of euphoric feeling, or else I wouldn't have wanted to do it again. I mean, there was something that was relieving, but even today, I would say I didn't look back and think, oh, it cured how I felt in the moment, or, it was an escape and it numbed me out. I don't think I ever felt that way. I think I just felt like, oh, this feels all right. This feels good.
Yeah.
So I don't have any real connection to, gosh, I remember the first time that I got drunk, or I remember the first time that I used drugs. None of that really has a significant impact on me. It was just, it was different than probably what I was feeling. And so I just kept doing it. And I didn't have anyone telling me to not.
I remember smoking grass for the first time, not really knowing what to expect. And it felt so good that I thought, I got to do that again. That was my thinking at the time. But yet I didn't pursue it. I was provided with marijuana from somebody else who was smoking it at the time. But like you, I didn't necessarily think I got to get over this feeling the way I'm feeling, so I'll take a drink or take a drug. So that followed you through middle school and into high school. Did you hang with people who were drinkers, or who did you hang with?
So I went to high school in Miami and, moved there kind of abruptly. And I guess I would say I always hung out with the partiers. We can find each other.
Sure.
Did a lot of, going out to clubs and being young and underage and feeling adult, like being able to do that. And
sure.
I wouldn't say that I had a particular group or crew that I hung out with, but I definitely could hang out with everyone. And for the most part, it seemed like everyone was doing what I was doing. And I didn't have anyone say, well, that's not true. I did have a couple of people who said, you know what, something different happens to you, or, you really dive into this. It's not the same as everyone else. But I thought, I just need new friends.
So they were telling you that at that point. So they saw something.
I responded differently. And it's as embarrassing as this is going to sound, is I thought they're just jealous.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering, whether or not you, because of that, sometimes people who are able to do the kind of things that you say you were doing become the leaders, the natural leaders. Everybody wants to follow that person because they can do whatever they're doing with impunity or without consequences. Were you a leader or a follower at that point, or were you on your own?
I think I was probably more independent than a leader or a follower. I navigated between lots of different groups of people and just didn't really I didn't follow the same rules as everyone. Obviously, I didn't think that they applied to me and that I could do whatever I wanted. And I just went where the wind blew me. I didn't follow a certain group around, and I certainly wasn't directing anyone else to do anything. I would invite people to do things with me, but I wouldn't consider myself a leader or a follower.
Did you get into trouble?
So I didn't in high school, but in junior high I did. In junior high, I got caught with this bottle of stuff that you huffed, and I had to go to an alternative school for a semester, which, I'm such a good adapter that, which like most of us are, that they told me you're going to have to go to this alternative school, and this is going to be the criteria. And I just said, okay, and did it very quickly and got through it, and then went back to school like nothing. In high school, I didn't have any consequences. I was a pretty good student, which I learned, I guess, that, being a good student kind of prevents a lot of parental interaction within schooling. And, no, I didn't have any kind of issues. And actually my senior year, I made, all A's, and I didn't have to even take finals. And
were you a functional drug and alcohol user by that point?
Yeah, well, I guess. It wasn't something, I can tell you that at that age in my life, it didn't dominate.
Right, I get it.
It was not like how it was, in my early 20s, where it was something I did all day, every day. At that point, it was something I did on the weekends or when I went out. It certainly wasn't something I did at home or something I thought about all the time or obsessed about. I do think that there is something about, external events that occur that kind of help us cross over that line, something environmental.
Oh, yeah.
And, up until that point, I had just kind of been stumbling through life, but it wasn't something that necessarily dominated every thought or action.
Yeah, I get that. You mentioned your early 20s. Could you walk us down the road a little bit to that point in your life from high school and where you were headed after high school?
So after high school, I had tried to do some college stuff. I really just wanted to be an adult and just kind of be on my own. And,
I see.
Tried to get some jobs, whatever, but ultimately ended up working in a bar because, it was so conducive to my lifestyle. By this point, it was really kind of accelerating. I was on my own. I was living independently. I was drinking a lot. I was doing a lot of cocaine. I also met a man and, we ended up getting married and having a kid. And so, by 22, I was married. By 23, I was a mom. So
wow.
It was, those kind of things happened really, very quickly. And I married someone who had some similar troubles that I had, which is obviously why we connected so quickly. Having a kid that young too makes it really very difficult because someone has to be the parent. And there was a lot of distance that grew between us because I couldn't go out all the time. But I maintained my using status. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
Getting married and having a kid that young really changed some stuff. Although I tried to really kind of get my stuff together, I ended up having this, he and I were struggling. We ended up separating, or I ended up having this car wreck where I injured myself pretty badly at 25. And then the next year divorced him. And I had head injuries. So I was in tear hospital for a long time. So I had a bunch of brain injuries.
Wow.
I broke my neck. I punctured my lungs. I broke my ribs. I was really injured for a long time. And decided that, life was going to be, I got a DWI out of that. But, at that point, my impulse was really kind of out of control. And I was not able to stop doing it. I didn't do any drugs because I was being tested all the time, but I drank.
I see.
And I drank pretty excessively.
So this is at 25 when you have this accident, and it's a drunk driving accident. You were going through a separation. You had, a 3-year-old at home.
Yes.
And you get into this horrendous auto accident. How long were you hospitalized?
It's funny. Obviously, I don't recall a whole lot of it. If you ask my daughter, she says like a month or two, maybe a month or two.
Wow.
But I was in Herman. I was life flighted to Herman. And then I spent some time there. And then I did the TIR outpatient at their challenge program for about 9 months, which is cognitive therapies and stuff for brain injuries.
So you had a TBI,
yes,
a traumatic brain injury.
And what's funny about that is, I try to explain to people today that I still have residual effects of that and I'm aware of them. They show up, when I'm tired or, whenever I'm stressed out. And it's, my emotions or, my word recognition. I'll misuse words. And a lot of it is due to kind of that injury. Although it's been a long time ago, residual effects will always be there. And I just have to be aware of them and live my life a little bit differently to kind of take care of myself as a result of that, which I learned in that program. That these are the things that will affect you and that you're going to have to be mindful of how you show up in life.
Yeah. So can you acknowledge learning any lessons from that DUI and that horrendous accident? What did you attribute that to?
Well, so my blood alcohol was really high. It was 0.38.
Right.
I get that it was related to drinking.
Right. But was that a wake-up call for you of any kind? Or did you come to the realization that, boy, I better stop doing that?
No, what I thought was I needed to stop driving. That I'm not a good driver. Because I continued to drink, but I just took taxis for a long time. But that happened when I was 25. I didn't get sober till I was 35.
Really?
And so several more run-ins, another DWI conviction, another arrest for a DWI, another multiple accidents where I should have been arrested, where I called my mom at the scene and she came out there.
Oh, my.
Lots of things occurred in the next 10 years before I actually got sober. But that was a pretty significant, I guess, experience because that was when I finally had the first real consequence of This is very damaging. And I only injured myself. And the car accident was just me. And people felt sorry for me because I had been injured so badly. So it wasn't, although it was a consequence, it wasn't one where people thought, you have got to stop drinking. It was one where people thought, I'm so glad that you survived this. We didn't think that you were going to make it.
Wow. So here in Texas, of course, around that time, multiple DWIs could land somebody in prison. What was your experience?
So the first one that I had, I got a year probation. I'm such a good probationer. I'm such a good rule follower. And I'm such a good, I guess, BSer, that I got through that just in the 1 year perfectly fine. The next one I had was a couple of years later. And in that one, that's the one where I was told I had to do treatment as a condition of my probation. So I did a residential treatment. That was the first time I had went. I had tried an outpatient program before that, which I got kicked out of.
Okay.
But
why'd they kick you out? I'm curious.
Well, because I had gotten really intoxicated and fell down, I guess, because I woke up with this bloody lip. And I don't really wear makeup or lipstick for sure.
Right.
But I went into this outpatient with this red lipstick on to kind of cover up the busted lip. And they pulled me aside and said, when you really want to do something about your substance use, you can come back to us. But until then, we're going to go ahead and ask you to leave because your participation is kind of disruptive.
Now, this outpatient after the inpatient that you were in?
Oh, no. That was an outpatient before the inpatient.
Okay. So you tried outpatient first and then you went inpatient. How long were you inpatient for?
So I guess 30 days.
30 days. Yeah, that's about right.
It was 2004, I guess. And then I did an inpatient. I did, I think 2 rounds of IOP afterwards.
Right.
I did not stay sober. I don't even know if I stayed sober through IOP. And then, ended up, my things really kind of took off from that point. I started meeting some people who were, although I had been doing, cocaine and drinking before then, I tried intravenous drug use at that point with some people I had gone to treatment with. And it really kind of accelerated everything.
Yeah. Talking about heroin.
The first thing that I used intravenously was heroin, but I was such a speed and cocaine person that as much as it was great doing it, I was really sick afterwards. I started using cocaine and methamphetamine via intravenous drug use too.
Wow. Yeah. Those are pretty nasty, aren't they?
They are. It just became an addiction all on its own.
I see. Yeah. So it was a physical addiction that had manifested itself for the first time in your life.
It was pretty intense. I mean, talk about obsessive behavior. I mean, just the ritual of trying to get it and trying to get everything that you need. And it was a different experience than anything that I had gone through. And I ended up back in treatment again, the following year. I went to a therapist's office looking for some sort of, barbiturate of some sort to go to sleep. And she quickly said, I wanted to give me a drug test. And I told her I was hot. And she got up and opened the door and told me to leave her office and to go get treatment and come back whenever I was really ready to. I mean, so it was a constant theme that people were like, when you're ready to do something, you can come back. But until then, we're going to ask you to leave now.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously I was doing some sort of drug seeking. So.
Yeah. And the fact that you found a way to go use after you got out of the facility with people with whom you were in the facility speaks to some of the difficulties people have with that. I'm curious, when you were inpatient for the 30 days or even in the outpatient the first couple of times, what was going through your head about what was going on around you? Did you have a desire to really do anything about it, or were you just...
I was going through the motions.
You were just serving the time.
Yeah, the second time, when I went the first time, it was because of my probation. When I went the second time, I really knew that I was starting to get sick. And I really needed some help. And then, the next year I went to another treatment center. So those two were at the same place. The next one I went to was, the third one that I went to was one that my parents had found for me, my mom and my stepfather, because obviously I had a lot of trauma that I needed to address also. And going to treatment to address my substance use disorders was one thing. but I really needed to address some of the trauma that I had experienced. I mean, I learned a lot about how to handle some of the things that had happened and got a lot of resolve.
Yeah.
However, the substance use part was just such an issue for me at that point that just resolving the trauma, that wasn't enough. So for me, I had all of the substance use disorder treatment. Now I was getting some trauma treatment. The dilemma that showed up is that I didn't know how to incorporate any of it into my life.
Okay. So you had all the information you needed. You just didn't have the input mechanism to really affect you on the inside, huh?
Or the willingness. I'm going to tell you, my first time in treatment, they did this thing called the Willingness Award. And I was so excited that I wanted to win the Willingness Award, and I had no idea what that meant. I won the Willingness Award, and I really fought to win it, and I did. But looking back now, I had no desire to be sober. I just wanted to win the award.
Wow.
So looking back, whenever I realized, like, I had been given all the information, I had been provided the resources and the tools. I had been able to get some resolve with some of the trauma. What I didn't have was the willingness to implement it into my life. With finally having people in my life really kind of give up and say, we're no longer going to participate in this with you. If you want to self-destruct, you can do that on your own. We're not going to help you with that anymore. Really pushed me to, you've got to start using this stuff and doing something differently if you really want to do it different.
This is what you're telling yourself on a constant basis at this point?
This is what I told myself. You know, the day I got sober, I said it was not a plan. I was again arrested. And this time I was arrested for another car accident.
Oh, my.
You know, I was 35. My daughter had been living kind of in and out with my parents and my ex-husband and me, and it was not a good scene. But I had this accident. I was coming across the freeway the wrong direction, caused an accident. The person was injured. I was intoxicated. I left the scene. And I was coming back from Austin. It was Lee County. They found me pretty quickly, and they arrested me. And they arrested me for, you know, an accident involving injury or death, plus a third DUI. And, you know, I called my brother, who was a lawyer, from the scene. You know, I had track marks. I was not in good shape. I was clearly intoxicated. He said, whatever you do, just don't say anything. Let me make some phone calls. And so my mom left. They decided to stay on my mom and my stepfather were on vacation. They stayed on their vacation. The agreement was that no one was going to bond me out and that I was just going to have to sit this out, which I did. And I needed that in that moment. I had to have the real clarity of my life is destructing. And either I can continue on this path or I can do something different. What was my choice to be?
We'll be right back. My friends, if you're enjoying AA Recovery interviews, I invite you to check out my latest audiobook, Alcoholics Anonymous, the story of how more than 100 men have recovered from alcoholism. This is the word-for-word, cover-to-cover reading of the first edition of the Big Book, published in 1939. It's a relaxing yet meaningful and engaging way to listen to the Big Book anytime, any place. Have a free listen at Audible, iTunes, or Amazon. While you're there, search for my other audiobook, Lost Stories of the Big Book, 30 original stories missing from the third and fourth editions of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's also available from Amazon as a Kindle book or in paperback if you'd like to read along. You're going to love it. And we're back. So like the hardcore consequence of actually being behind bars. How old were you when this happened, and how long did you suffer the consequences of that?
So I was 35.
Legally.
It was 2 days after my 35th birthday. And as a matter of fact, when I walk in, they're excited. Look who's having a birthday. Kind of making fun of me. I was in the county jail for 2 months. And that was before I went to court because I had to get indicted. And then I could go to court. So I went to court.
Right.
And I was really surprised that they were offering me probation.
Wow. On the third DUI?
Well, they dropped the third DUI, and I had to plea out on the accident involving injury or death, the failure to stop and render aid.
Okay.
So I got 5 years probation, which I took. And, you know, my mom let me come back to her house for a couple of weeks. And then they put me into an apartment. And it's so funny that they'd been paying for so many things for me for so long that this time when she said, we're going to put you in this apartment and we're going to pay 6 months rent, but we're not paying anything else. You're going to have to figure some stuff out. And I remember looking at her and saying, I'm really grateful. Thank you. And meaning that.
Wow.
Because I knew she didn't have to do any of it.
Yeah. When you went into that apartment, this is how long before your actual sobriety date?
Well, I count my sobriety date from the day I was arrested, that April 10th. And when I got out on June 4th, and I went to a meeting that day. Uh-huh. And, wow. I went to meetings every day pretty much thereafter.
How had you learned about AA?
I'd learned about AA from being in treatment before.
Sure, okay.
And I had been in and out of going to meetings and going to treatment and whatever. I mean, I'd been involved in AA, so I knew people in AA. Yeah. But most people just thought I was a joke because I didn't stay sober. And so this time, I mean, I really was super hyper-focused on my job is to come here and use this as a tool to get sober. Uh-huh. I'm not here to make friends. I'm not here to whatever. Wow. Eventually, I realized if I don't start making some friends in this, I'm probably not going to survive it either. But my initial goal was this was my job every day to come here and learn about myself and practice sobriety. And I treated it like that. I treated it super serious and 100%, focused on my goal is to come here to get what I need in these rooms and then to go home and practice it.
That's something. So you had enough, obviously, by this point. You came into AA. Did you get a sponsor right away? How did the first couple weeks or couple months of your AA experience look like? Okay,
so in this sobriety, right, the one that we're in now, I had, this is where I know God exists, right? So I had, right before, I had that arrest and stuff, maybe 6 months before that, I had been at a meeting and this girl came up to me. I was intoxicated at the meeting. This girl came up to me and she started talking to me. She gave me her phone number. I got her, she got mine and said, you should call me, whatever. And for some reason, I thought about this girl and tried to call her when I got to my mom's house. And I got her voicemail and I didn't leave a message. And I told you I started going to meetings with some people that I knew. And that girl was at every meeting that I went to. And when she saw me, she said, hey, how are you doing? Whatever. And I went about 2 weeks out of jail. I went to hear her tell her story. And afterwards, I went up to her and said, so I really need a sponsor. And she said, I'm so glad that I have been wanting to ask you about this. She pulled out her calendar and she started putting me in it right then. And I'm still friends with her today.
Wow.
She lives in Dallas now. And I eventually one day I said to her, what's funny is I tried to call you when I got out of jail. Of all people, she was the person I tried to call. And then I ran into her everywhere. So I do think that was not on accident.
Yeah, that's a God thing, isn't it?
Absolutely.
What were the meetings like when you first came in? Let's say the first 6 months. Did you feel comfortable, uncomfortable? Did you want to engage with the fellowship, or were you resistant to that? What was it like during your first year of sobriety?
So I would say I was pretty resistant to the fellowship. I'd had some experiences that I thought were less than stellar. I was really resistant to buddy up with a lot of people. But I can tell you what my sponsor said to me was, she said, hey, look, when someone comes in, she's like, I get it. Maybe you have some issues with people who have been here for a while with some of the stuff that, you did, they did, who cares? But when you see someone new come into this room who raises their hand and says that they're new, you need to go over to them and you need to introduce yourself to them and you need to get their phone number and start calling them. So she really instilled that in me. So a lot of times I ended up knowing people who had less sobriety than me because that's what it was ingrained in me to do. You need to if you feel like you came in here and people didn't make you feel welcome, you need to make other people feel welcome. You need to make sure that you go up to them, you talk to them, you get their phone number, and then you call them. You include them. You make them feel welcome. Yeah. That is your job in this right now is for you to now start sticking your hand out to other people.
That's brilliant advice, huh?
It made a huge difference.
So you got to know a lot of new people, and because they were newer than you had more experience and were able to share with them what experience you had?
Well, no, I think it was teaching me about how to develop friendships with people and not feel so judged, because obviously I was judging myself and my own failure previously.
Oh, yeah.
But in addition to that, if you go back through the literature, right, it tells you that a fellowship grows around you. Like it does. You don't step into a fellowship a lot of times. It builds. And this was me. I didn't even realize it at the time, was me building a fellowship. And although, I may not know a lot of these people today, there have been plenty of times where people have said to me they didn't realize, years later, how much sobriety I had, because I would go up to them, hey, how's it going? So glad that you're here, whatever. And they would think that I was kind of, on the level with them with 6 months to a year sobriety, to learn that I had 8 or 9 years. Because I just think that it's so important to make people feel welcome. And that there is no separation based off of time, that we're all trying to do this together.
Yeah, and you and I are eye to eye on that one, because I believe the very same thing. My sponsor had me do that too early on. He said, I want you to meet at least 3 people in every meeting you go into, and I want you to make sure that you come early, stay late, get to meet the people, don't run out of the meeting like you used to do. And it did. It made a big difference, certainly within that first year of sponsorship, because I didn't get a sponsor till I was sober almost a year.
Oh, wow.
And almost went back out and drank because I didn't have any real investment in the program. How invested were you during the first couple of years, let's say even up to 5 years? Were you all in?
I was absolutely both feet all in. Yeah. And now, of course, that's after almost 6 years of struggling.
Yeah, of course. Jeez.
So when I got sober on April 10th of 2009, both feet were in 100%. However, I did not go to meetings early and stay late. I did not engage with a lot of people that had been around for a long time. Really, I went in, I got my AA, I would talk to some new people and leave. It wasn't until I was about, 4 or 5 years sober that I realized I have got to start making some friends in this thing, or else I'm never going to make it. I had a handful of friends that I considered good friends, but it wasn't until about 4 or 5 years sober that I started really kind of broadening and meeting more people and having more people get close to me. I was super shut off, unwilling to let people get close still. I was still really guarded, protecting myself from, although I had addressed a lot of trauma from earlier years, I still had residual effects from that. So letting people get close to me was not my main goal. My main goal when I got here was to stay sober, because that had been such a huge challenge for me. So developing relationships was kind of secondary. And it wasn't until after my father died when I was about 4 years sober. And that was around the time that I started realizing I was going to have to start really investing differently and creating relationships, or else I wasn't going to stay. I think I've always been more emotionally driven. So I think that, me speaking authentically and genuinely from the heart is it just comes naturally for me, which is why I think it's harder for me to have, surface relationships with people. And I always have, a few select people I'm pretty close with, because I am so heart and soul driven.
Yeah, I get it.
That, having that many relationships with people is hard. So when I would get called on, it took me forever to learn how to talk in meetings. I do know that for many years prior to my sobriety date, I would get called on and I'd always say I wanted to listen. And I made a conscious decision, I guess I should say, that when I got sober, that if I got called on, I was just going to share. And I was just going to share, even if it was just what was going on with me at that moment. Because maybe that's all I have to offer and give at the moment. I may not have a lot of sobriety. I may not have a lot of this or a lot of recovery, but part of my participation is sharing my experience. And that is how we connect and bond with people. And a lot of times people don't know you unless they get to hear what it is that you're thinking, feeling, and saying. So I made this conscious commitment that I was never going to pass. And to date, I still have never said, I'm just going to listen.
That's interesting.
So when I get called on, no matter what frame of mind I'm in, I share what's going on with me, where I'm at, if it's on topic or not, whatever the case may be, because I think that is my duty and commitment. It is actually 12-step work. If you look in the 12 of 12, sometimes the only service work that we can provide is sharing in a meeting when we get called on.
Yeah, I get that.
So for me, it it was really important, and I've still maintained that. And sometimes people think, oh my God, I can't believe you shared that. And then other people come up to me afterwards and say, I'm so glad you shared that. I'm struggling with that. And I don't hear anyone ever say anything.
Yeah, I understand. And that is such an important thing to be able to do, to be able to share openly and honestly with people in the program. So this sounds like a turning point in your program when you finally went from I'm just listening to I will share from the heart every time I get called on. How long had you been sober by the time you had that realization?
Well, I made the decision to do that when I got called on, when I showed up in 2009 and have been sober since. But it probably didn't change, or I probably didn't have like the emotional connection to it or impact from it until probably about when I remember when my dad died, about how that was affecting me and how I learned that it was okay to cry and it was okay to share these difficult things that I'm dealing with in a space where it's supposed to be safe. Yeah. And so I think that it was probably that was a huge turning point, just because I was sharing more deeply. I mean, I learned how to share. I learned how to say what was going on or share on topic or whatever. But when it transitioned into kind of more, this is what's happening for me right now, and it's really very difficult and painful, was probably that.
Mm-hmm. That's similar to my situation, where the day my dad passed away, well, actually, I was here and he was out west, but the day I got there to my sister's house to do the funeral, I went to an AA meeting before anything else. The morning my mother died, 2 hours after I closed her eyelids and she breathed her last breath, we were all bedside. I was sitting in a meeting of AA and sharing what was going on, a very heartfelt share, because that's exactly what had just happened. What was beautiful about it was it's like, it wasn't what they said, it was just the energy that shifted in the room. And it kind of enveloped me in knowing that I was sitting in a place of real love and acceptance, that here I had gone through this, I could share it with others, and it would make just a huge difference. Did you find that with your dad too?
So, he and I were not close. I spent the last, 5 or 6 months of his life trying to clear up the past that we had, because we knew he was terminal. But so what's interesting about this is, so I had started, so I told you I had gone to a patient, and they reached out to me about bringing meetings in-house. Mm-hmm. And so I had been taking meetings in-house to their patients for about 5 or 6 months. So the day he died was the day that I went up there to take meetings in. And he died that morning, and I left work. And that evening, I had asked someone to come with me because I didn't think that I would be able to really do the meeting, but I wanted to still, be there and show up, be consistent, whatever, be accountable. And at the end of the meeting, they had known that I had kind of been struggling with what was happening. I shared that he died that morning. Yeah. And how, it was really important for me to still be there that evening, because I was really grateful that I had somewhere to go. Yeah. And I was grateful that I could still show up for other people, even when I was dealing with something that was so difficult. Yeah. That, this was it was kind of like a reconfirming or solidifying my commitment to my recovery being there, because without it, I didn't have anything else. And I knew that. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I really knew that before, because everything was always an excuse to not show up, to not have to do the hard stuff, whatever. Mm-hmm. But I made a conscious decision to still show up to that meeting and to still do everything that I was supposed to do commitment wise. And I guess that's probably why service work is so important to me now, is that anytime that something is going on, I still show up. Yeah. Even if I don't want to, and life is difficult and hard and heavy at the moment, I have this connection, this commitment to the group or whatever, that I still do it. And so that experience probably really kind of changed and shifted how I viewed how doing that kind of stuff helped me.
So that was at about 4 years that happened after you were in the program?
Yeah. I celebrated 4 years in April, and it was the last day of February. So just about a month away from having 4 years.
So that commitment that you made to take that meeting or start that meeting in the clinic there kind of became a touchstone for you with AA and service work, huh?
Absolutely.
Huh. That's great.
Which is why I sync it out when stuff is, go a little chaotic in my life.
Right.
I mean, I usually seek out ways to be connected to the program because I know that that's what helps me get through it.
Yeah. So you're working the program at this point. You're already through your steps by this point at 4 years.
Oh, yeah.
So what kind of challenges did you face then? Obviously, your dad passing was a big one, but what kind of other challenges between that event and today that, had you not been sober, you might not have lived through or gotten through? Were there times that things came up that made you want to just toss AA to the curb and drink again?
Oh, yeah, yes, there has been. You mean you want to know what those things are?
Well, if you care to tell me, yeah.
Well, so at, right before 4 years is when my dad died. At 5 years, I met someone in AA. We started dating. We ended up getting married, which turned out to be not a great experience in the end.
Yeah.
And so that, there was a lot of difficulty around the ending of that. Mm-hmm. But, I think I thought that how can people be sober and behave this way? Mm-hmm. And so in the last couple of years, I've had to remember or realize that, just because we're sober, we're not perfect.
Yeah.
And, I hold people in recovery to a different standard.
Yeah. Yeah.
And think that, I've had to go through so much and so much personal change along the way, and realizing that there are certain things that I cannot do and stay sober. Right. And so I think that has to be the same for everybody. And this has kind of been an opportunity for me to realize that everyone's recovery is different.
Yeah.
And I know for me that my honesty and my ability to go back and clean up things that have been damaging are really important. When I was 9, right before I had 9 years sober, I met this young girl who had been involved in an accident where a person did not survive. There was a fatality. And I got really close with this girl, and I'm so close with her now. And her whole experience reminded me that, I had this car accident, which started out my sobriety, and I didn't even know the person's name who I'd been involved in the car accident with. And watching how this was affecting her and how I had just kind of gone on my way, thinking, I took my consequence. Look at me. Look how great I'm doing in my sobriety. I'm doing all this stuff. And I realized that I hadn't ever attempted to find out what happened to that person or, even what their name was or make any kind of amends to them. And so I sought out on this journey to do that.
Really? Wow.
Yes. And, I dug through a bunch of paperwork. I had the person's name. I had their address. I had their phone number. And I did a lot of work on it and a lot of prayers on it. And, I tried to call. The number was disconnected. But I wrote this letter. I did a bunch of research to make sure they supposedly still lived at the address and they survived and whatever. But I did write a letter to the person, giving them my name, my phone number, my address, whatever it is that they would need. And that I was willing to hear whatever it is they had to say to me. That, that day changed my life. I had never drank or done drugs since then. But I recognized that it probably changed their life too. And that if there's anything that they needed from me today, that I was willing to do it.
Wow.
And, I popped it in the mail. And to date, I still have never heard anything back from them. But the letter never got returned to me either.
Wow.
So, and I guess I tell you that because, fast forward, here I am, that was at 9 years. At almost 11 is when things in my life kind of blew up, or I guess 10 and a half. And I remember that sometimes it takes some of us a little bit longer to realize the damage that we have done and how we need to repair it. And I get stuck in the whole, you need to repair it now. Yeah. And I forget that it took me a long time to realize what I needed to do. Yeah. And that didn't mean that I was bad. It just meant that I just, when the time is right, the time is right. And we know it and we take care of it. So I've had a lot of resolve in the last year and a half around some of the stuff that happened, and I really wanted to blame AA and the people that were in it and their bad behavior and whatever. But I realized that people are just people. Right. Right. I mean, we're all just trying to do whatever we can to get through that moment to be able to survive ourselves. Yeah. And, I was in graduate school at the time, so that was kind of chaotic, which is a whole other experience. Realizing that I could do that. I learned that even though I was going through some really difficult stuff, that I could still achieve goals and be successful and, apply for jobs in other states and get them, even having a criminal background and, be successful in what it is that I want to do and keep trying for things. Cause there was a long time where I didn't try for stuff because I didn't think that I would be able to. Yeah. And so learning that, I have to keep putting one foot in front of the other and that nothing happens on accident. All of this lined up divinely is exactly how it should have been. Yeah. As much as I wanted to be angry and leave AA, I'm going to tell you, I had a whole plan to leave AA. I mean, I was trying to ditch every service commitment that I had, which I had a lot. I was on a board at a club. I was still the treasurer at that club, that group that you and I spoke about. And I was trying my hardest to get rid of this. I had sponsees. Oh, the board thing actually was after, I forgot that I had been nominated and I was leaving AA effectively May 31st of last year. And on June 4th, I got a call that said, surprise, congratulations, you were elected. And I thought, I'm never going to get away from this. But, God shows up in ways for us and we can appreciate it or we can resist it. And so once again, it kept me connected. Yeah. And then I get here and I do, my job and I'm on all these committees and I end up getting connected to someone who helps me get connected to a woman here where I live who's super involved. And next thing you know, I have a sponsor that's getting me involved in all other kind of stuff here. Wow. Everything lines up. And so I didn't end up leaving. And I spoke very openly about how I was angry at AA and angry at the people. And
what were people telling you when you were expressing that? Because I remember seeing you in meetings and you were one angry woman.
I was pretty pissed.
I didn't want to approach you because I thought I'll let the women do that. What kind of feedback were you getting when you were about ready to diss the program for good?
So because some of the conflict I had was with other women and my husband at the time, there was a real division. And I think that it was a lot for people to take on. And plus, my former husband was denying some of the stuff. So there was a lot of, and of course he kept telling me, oh, that's private. And, I really think that this is where I should be able to share this. I had several women come up to me afterwards who were dealing with something very similar. Okay, good. Maybe not with other women in AA, but dealing with that in their home life. And so it actually allowed us to have something to support each other through. And then I had several girlfriends, some I knew long before I was ever in recovery, some that I know from AA, that were really very supportive and, helping me through it. But you know what? We're all on this journey, right? I mean,
yeah, we are.
It takes what it takes. We have to work through it however we work through it. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, telling someone that they're working through it wrong is really unfair because everyone deals with stuff differently. I was angry. I was.
I'll bet you were.
But mostly I was hurt.
Yeah. I remember that and seeing you at the time. I knew some of the story, but not very much of it. And that's one of the most difficult things. I've seen this happen for other people in the program where outside circumstances intrude upon the program that a person is working, either because of things, interpersonal relationships that go awry within the program within a meeting, that sort of thing, where personalities start to prevail over principles, and people don't want to go to that meeting because their ex-spouse is going to be there, or they don't want to do this because they might run into the person who their spouse was seeing or whatever. That's got to be a really difficult thing to get through. And the fact that you got through it is nothing short of amazing.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
At the time, I don't think I ever thought that I would get through it.
Really? You thought AA was in the rearview mirror at that point, huh?
I don't know if maybe I thought AA was, but I thought that I was never going to trust.
Yeah. It takes a while to learn to kind of regain that trust. I've had some situations in my life that really strained the fabric of trust, and it's a very difficult thing. You spend the rest of whatever trying to reestablish it, and the best that I was able to do was not reestablish the original trust, but kind of establish a new kind of trust, if that makes sense.
True. And you know what's funny is, it's been, I think the divorce finalized a year and a half ago, a little over a year ago, I guess, May of last year. What's funny is that I still believe that there is someone for me, and that, I'm still going to be happy, and that I'm still going to have a life that I want. And I can tell you that I would bet before sobriety, I would have thought, I'm never doing this again. I'm done. Forget the idea of this kind of stuff. But I don't think that everyone is inherently bad. And I don't think that everyone wants to hurt me. I mean, I don't feel like a victim. I feel like this is a situation that happened, and it was difficult in the time, and it was something else I had to learn how to get through. And that in some small way, these people did me a favor. What an experience now to be able to share with other people that go through this, that I can say, you can get through this too.
Yeah, so the crisis that you went through turns into a gift that you can pass on to other people who are going through it or are yet to go through it. Absolutely.
You know what I mean? There are tons of miracles that happen in this program. And, even though we look at it at the moment as something that's, oh, this is so awful and terrible, those things become the assets that we have to be able to share. I mean, no one got here with this great life. Like, we all got here with something that happened that was probably pretty damaging, pretty embarrassing, pretty whatever. And then we get to go and share that with other people who are either going through it, may go through it, have family members that are going through it, and get to see that, hey, you know what? This may have happened, but in the end, you're going to see that it's going to make you a better person, or you're going to get past it and think you won't look at this the same way. Being able to share that with someone else, in my opinion, makes it all worth it. Makes it all meaningful, gives it all purpose. And I think for the longest time, I didn't know how to look for the meaning or the purpose of why this was happening. But now I see it as a whole different, I guess the perspective and the lens that I look through is different. It is what it is. And it's something that happened. And it's something that when someone else comes to me in the future and says, I'm dealing with these things, I can say, I understand. What we need to do is redirect your focus on how you can take care of you right now instead of thinking about what you need to take care of in this. I had completely forgotten being busy working, being in graduate school, doing an internship, whatever. I've completely forgotten the importance of caring for myself, which is supposed to be number one. If I'm not taking care of me, how in the world am I supposed to take care of anything else? I hadn't been doing that for a long time. I've been putting my faith and trust in people instead of God. I mean, all these things that it really kind of redirected my focus back to what was it like when I very first got here, and what were the things that were important that kept me sober? And, all this other stuff was just stuff.
Yeah, so you recalibrated your life to sobriety being your number one priority after it's slipping for a while.
Yeah, I recommitted. The fact that things kind of blew up along the way, is just whatever. But it's also helps me see that I can make it through some really hard stuff.
Yeah, and you have. And what's beautiful about it is you describe the difficult, almost tragic situation that you went through, but at the end of it comes the gift. I wanted to ask you with regard to gifts, because we talk about how did you get through what you got through, stuff that was tough. But can you think of a couple of gifts that have occurred in your life since you've been sober that probably never would have happened had you not?
I can think of a lot of them. Well, I never would have cleared up that relationship with my dad.
Oh, yeah.
Before he died. That's for sure. I wouldn't have realized that this is the time to do it.
Yeah.
And I need to do it now or else I may regret it. The relationship that I have with my daughter today is pretty phenomenal. And as a matter of fact, she had a friend in high school who actually just overdosed and didn't survive.
Oh,
and I'm the person she called to talk to about it.
Wow.
And, she did this. She's a musician. So she did this kind of campaign thing on her social media to get people to donate in this kid's name. And if they did, she would give them her band t-shirts for free.
Yeah.
And she spoke about how, addiction has been a part of her life for the people closest to her that she watched struggle and overcome it. And talk about a gift, right? That even my own kid sees that. Wow. And that relationship with her is so strong.
That is a gift.
And the relationship with my family is pretty amazing. I never would have thought that I could, complete my education and then pursue higher education and, try for jobs that most people wouldn't have and be in a position to be able to accept it. I mean, I really feel like the ability to believe in myself more than I ever did before and know that I am 100% capable.
Yeah.
I think that I was such a give up person and I'm not anymore.
Yeah. You've spoken to that quite well today. For as long as I've known you, I've always wondered a little bit about the backstory. This means a lot to me that you would let me into your life like this and trust me with putting this together. So sounds like the gifts they keep coming for you, don't they?
They do keep coming. Yeah. And what's funny is I know there's going to be more.
Oh, yeah.
I remember early on hearing that, don't quit 5 minutes before the miracle. I think that's a true statement. Yeah. Even today, like the miracles and the gifts just keep coming. Yeah. And the longer that I stick around, the more that I see them and that I feel them and that I receive them.
Wow. That's a great sentiment to wrap things up here, Alisha. You're a beautiful person. I love you. And you've enriched my sobriety, both knowing you in meetings and in the program, but just today has been a really special time for me. And I want to thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you for asking me.
Well, my friends, that's a wrap of today's episode of AA Recovery Interviews. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed AA Recovery Interviews, will you please tell others how to listen to it? Think of it as a little AA service that spreads the word about this rich and meaningful listening experience. It's yet another helping hand we can all extend to alcoholics everywhere. Listen to all of the interviews in this podcast series by following it on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Pandora, Stitcher, and other podcast providers. Or tell Siri, Google Assistant, or Alexa, play AA Recovery Interviews podcast. Or visit our website, aarecoveryinterviews.com, to hear every show to date. If you want to email me directly, it's Howard at aarecoveryinterviews.com. The next episode of AA Recovery Interviews is on the way, so keep coming back. It'll be here soon.